The first sign that something was terribly wrong did not come from the bodies. It came from the silence, high above Gunnison County, where the earth folds into endless ridges of pine and wind-bitten stone. A lone hiker moved through the meadow. His footsteps crushed the brittle grass that had somehow survived the brutal winter, but the air around him felt wrong, still, thick, as if it was holding its breath. Then he saw it, a flash of gray deep within the trees. A tent that should not have been there. It sagged in on itself, collapsed under its own weight like something long defeated. The ground around it was disturbed, marked by patches of human waste and the pale remains of last year's snowfall. Nothing moved, no fire pit, no backpacks, no wildlife, not even flies, just a tent and whatever waited inside. He stepped closer, and the mountain, vast and ancient, seemed to recoil. That was the moment the story of 3 vanished souls finally came back to the world. But the truth behind that moment had begun nearly a year earlier, in the warm, uneasy days of late summer 2022. Rebecca Vance had always been the quiet one, a thinker, a worrier, the kind of woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders long before anyone asked her to. But something inside her had shifted during those final years of the pandemic, when news headlines blurred with online conspiracies and fear sharpened into belief. Her family had noticed, her sister Christine especially. There had been a time when Rebecca laughed easily, when she taught her son, Talon, how to ride his bike in their Colorado Springs cul-de-sac and waved to neighbors without imagining danger in their smiles. But that part of her life had begun to fade, replaced by hours spent spiraling through online forums about the world collapsing, the government lying, society teetering on the edge of ruin. Rebecca believed something was coming, something catastrophic, and she believed she had to save her family from it. To Rebecca, the world was no longer home. It was a threat, and the mountains were her escape. In early August, she packed their old car with the things she believed mattered most: a cheap gray tent, a few thrift store blankets, canned food, a camp stove missing its lighter, and the conviction that survival was within reach. She told her family they were going camping for a few days, maybe a week. She smiled, reassured them, promised to call soon. They had no reason to doubt her. No one suspected that she never intended to return. Christine went along because she loved her sister. Talon went because he trusted his mother. What none of them understood was how unforgiving the mountains could be, especially at 10,000 feet, especially when winter comes early. The drive into Gunnison County was almost beautiful. The roads curved like rivers between cliff walls and golden meadows. The sun warmed the dashboard. For Talon, it probably felt like a strange adventure, a family escape, a new beginning. For Rebecca, it was a last chance to outrun the fear clawing at her mind. As they climbed higher, the horizon widened into a kingdom of mountains. Peaks rose like jagged crowns, circling the sky. The air thinned, crisp and sharp. It was the kind of altitude where breath becomes precious and nights become deadly. But Rebecca saw safety where others would see danger, isolation where others saw abandonment, a sanctuary where others would see death. She found a clearing far off any marked trail, no campgrounds, no cabins, no road access, just trees and wind and the distant echo of something wild moving in the forest. She told Christine it was perfect. Christine, loyal and hopeful, nodded. Talon, still young enough to believe in his mother, agreed, and the mountains swallowed them whole. The first nights might have felt peaceful. A fire crackling, stars scattering across the sky, the world below forgotten. But peace at that altitude is always temporary. The temperature drops like a falling stone. The wind cuts through sleeping bags like knives. Wildlife moves close. Hunger grows faster than hope. The 3 of them, inexperienced and underprepared, tried to treat the mountain like a temporary home, but the mountain does not negotiate. It does not wait for someone to learn how to survive. It does not care if you are scared or hungry or determined. They rationed food. They burned through their firewood in weeks. They underestimated the cold. They overestimated their strength. And every day, Rebecca convinced herself that returning to civilization meant danger. She believed the apocalypse could begin any moment, and so she stayed, and she kept her family there with her. What began as fear slowly shifted into something darker, a kind of devotion, a slow, quiet surrender. By October, snow had already crept into the valley. By November, it buried the tent completely. By December, the mountain became their prison. Far below, in Colorado Springs, friends and relatives waited for a call that never came. They assumed Rebecca and Christine were busy. They assumed Talon was enjoying the outdoors. They assumed nothing terrible had happened. Sometimes the greatest tragedies hide behind ordinary expectations. Winter tightened its fist, and the three bodies, still alive then, still trying, fought to survive nights that dipped to 20 below zero. Frostbite creeped into fingers. Stomachs gnawed at emptiness. Their fire extinguished one stormy night, leaving them with no way to relight it. From that moment on, the cold owned them. Hope shrank into silence, and in the heart of the wilderness, the tent became less of a shelter and more of a slow, inevitable tomb. When the hiker reached the tent nearly a year later, he noticed something else unsettling. The zipper was half open, as if someone inside had tried to leave, then changed their mind. The canvas was stiff with weather and time. The smell was faint but unmistakable. Something had happened here, something final, something tragic. He stepped forward. His hand touched the tent, and the fabric collapsed inward, revealing what the mountain had been hiding. 3 mummified figures, 3 quiet stories of fear, devotion, and loss. 3 souls who vanished into the trees believing they were escaping danger, only to meet it face to face. The hiker stumbled back. And just like that, the world Rebecca tried to outrun finally came for her family, through the man who discovered them, through the investigators who would soon descend on the site, and through the truth that would begin to unravel. Because nothing about what they found made sense, not yet, and the real mystery was only beginning. The investigation began before the bodies were even moved. The mountain demanded that much. As deputies and forensic teams hiked up the narrow trail, the wind pressed hard against their jackets, almost as if the wilderness itself was warning them to turn back. But they pushed on, drawn by the unanswered questions sitting in the heart of the trees. They found the hiker waiting near the clearing, pale and shaken, unable to look at the tent again. He didn't have to. The scene spoke for itself. Nothing about the campsite felt accidental, but nothing felt intentional either. It was as if the entire area had been frozen in the middle of a desperate moment. Inside the tent, the bodies rested where they had fallen, one lying near the entrance, one curled on the right side, one leaning against the rear wall. The investigators could not yet tell who died first, but the darkness of the long winter had left its marks on each of them. The first puzzling detail came from the supplies. There were hardly any. A few crumpled food wrappers, 1 half-used gas canister, 2 cheap blankets, a notebook with scribbles that made no sense. No proper winter gear, no tools, no weapons, not even a lighter. It was survival stripped bare, like a family who believed preparation was unnecessary, or who believed something else entirely. When investigators checked the surrounding trees, they discovered almost no signs of firewood gathering. No chopped branches, no stacked logs, no attempts to shield the tent from storms. It was as if the 3 had arrived expecting the mountain to protect them. That was the first real clue that something deeper was at play. The second clue was found in the notebook. It wasn't a journal in the normal sense. It held no dates, no full sentences, no detailed thoughts. Just phrases scattered across the pages, written in shaky handwriting. Trust no one, the world is almost gone, stay together, they cannot find us, we survive by faith. The investigators paused. This was not the writing of a family who went camping for fun. This was the writing of people who believed they were hiding from something. And the question emerged like a cold breath inside the tent. Hiding from what? Down in Colorado Springs, detectives began contacting the remaining family members. They asked when Rebecca, Christine, and Talon had last been heard from. They asked if the women had ever mentioned going off-grid. That word, off-grid, would soon define the entire investigation. Relatives spoke carefully. Some had suspected Rebecca had been struggling with fear. A few mentioned she had talked about conspiracies, doomsday websites, and societal collapse. But no one imagined she would take her son, pack a tent, and disappear into the mountains. One relative said something that lingered in the detective's mind. She believed the world wasn't safe anymore, but she thought she could build one that was. The words tightened the knot forming in the investigators' stomachs, because hope mixed with fear can become its own form of danger. The autopsies revealed the next piece of the mystery. There was no violence, no blunt force trauma, no poison, no signs of a struggle, no predator attack. They had died exactly the way the wilderness kills those unprepared. Slowly, silently, without mercy, starvation, hypothermia, exposure, but the results raised yet another question. Why didn't they leave? When temperatures plummet below freezing, even inexperienced hikers try to escape. People walk miles, crawl miles, scream miles. They do anything to reach warmth, but all three bodies were found inside the tent, as if they accepted their fate, as if they believed staying was safer than returning to the world. It made no sense, and that contradiction became the center of the case. The deeper investigators dug, the more disturbing the truth became. Search histories recovered from Rebecca's computer showed hours spent on survival forums filled with conspiracy theories. Groups claiming civilization would collapse within months, posts urging believers to disappear into remote areas before it was too late. Rebecca didn't just read them, she followed them. Even worse, they found printed screenshots with handwritten notes. It was clear the family had planned their escape longer than anyone knew, but the planning was unrealistic, almost childlike. It was survival through imagination, not reality, and buried within those notes was the most chilling detail yet. Rebecca wrote that they must not return to civilization for any reason, not sickness, not hunger, not cold. Returning meant danger, returning meant death. The investigators' breath caught when they realized the implications. These three did not just die because they were unprepared. They died because their fear of the world below was greater than their fear of the mountain above. They chose to stay, even as their bodies gave out. Even as winter closed in, it was not a crime of violence, it was a crime of belief. Meanwhile, the local community struggled to understand how a mother, a sister, and a child could vanish without anyone noticing. News stations replayed images of the campsite, the tent, the snowy expanse. The story spread quickly, and with it came anger. Why didn't someone check on them? Why didn't the family report them sooner? Why didn't authorities track their vehicle earlier? Why weren't signs of distress taken seriously? The investigators shared these questions, and they carried the weight of each one, because tragedy always reveals the cracks in the world. And these cracks were wide. Back at the mountainside, one final discovery deepened the mystery even further. Near the tree line, just out of sight from the tent, officers found a small makeshift structure made of branches. Inside it sat a single tin can, a plastic bowl, and a neatly folded shirt, like a shrine or a last attempt to create order in the chaos. The shirt belonged to Talon. The discovery froze everyone at the scene. It meant one thing. He had tried to keep hope alive longer than the adults. He had tried to create something, anything, a place, to hold on to the idea that he might survive. The investigators stood in silence, because that small structure said more about the tragedy than any autopsy ever could. As the case files grew thicker, a disturbing truth emerged in the minds of those working it. This was not just a story of isolation, not just a story of fear, not just a story of cold. It was a story of devotion twisted into danger. A mother who wanted to protect her family from an imaginary threat, and in doing so, led them straight into a real one. But the most haunting question still lingered. Why did no one realize they were missing for nearly a year? The answer to that question would come in Chapter 3, and it would expose a truth far heavier than the bodies found in the tent. A truth about family, about responsibility, and about how silence can kill just as surely as winter. The truth did not come all at once. It arrived in fragments, drifting through interviews, phone records, and small clues that seemed insignificant until placed together. Each piece revealed not only what happened on the mountain, but why it was allowed to happen at all. And the investigators soon realized something chilling. The tragedy in the tent was not just born in the wilderness. It was born in the world below. The revenge in this story would not come from a person. It would come from the truth itself. In the weeks following the discovery, detectives studied the timeline with relentless focus. They wanted to understand how 3 people could disappear from Colorado Springs for almost a year without a single missing persons report. The first answer was simple and yet devastating. Rebecca had withdrawn from everyone long before she vanished. She cut off friends politely. She stopped attending gatherings. She avoided neighbors. She homeschooled Talon. She spoke less, listened less, trusted less. Isolation began long before she reached the mountains, but the second answer was far more painful. Her family had grown used to her distance. When she said she was going camping, they believed her. When she didn't answer her phone, they assumed she was unplugging. When weeks passed, then months, they told themselves she would come back when she was ready. No one understood how deep her fear had become. No one imagined she was walking into a death sentence with the 2 people she loved most. The investigators realized something cruel. The family had not vanished because no one cared. They vanished because everyone thought someone else was watching. A truth that would haunt those who survived them. The final breakthrough came from something small, almost dismissed at first. A receipt. Found inside Rebecca's car, it was dated August 17, 2022. From a discount store, 3 pairs of socks, 2 blankets, 1 pack of instant noodles, 1 $5 flashlight, nothing more, no compass, no winter gear, no emergency food, no map, no survival tools. It wasn't just unprepared, it was delusional. The detective holding the receipt felt a cold wave wash down his spine. This was not a woman preparing for a long-term survival mission. This was a woman preparing for a fantasy that would collapse the moment reality touched it. And that collapse became the force that killed them. But the investigation revealed another layer, one that shifted the story from heartbreak to something deeper, almost moral. Neighbors told detectives that Rebecca had often spoken about saving her son from a doomed world. She believed she was protecting him. She believed she was giving him a better chance. Her mind had been shaped by fear, sharpened by conspiracies, and fueled by online communities that encouraged isolation. Detectives realized they were not only looking at a tragedy, they were looking at the cost of misinformation. A silent killer, one that doesn't leave fingerprints, one that doesn't need weapons. It only needs belief. That belief had crawled into Rebecca's mind. It had wrapped itself around her heart, and it had devoured her judgment until she could no longer tell danger from safety. In that sense, the real culprit was not the mountain. It was the world she feared. While the autopsies interviews, and evidence formed a clear picture, one last piece remained: the fate of young Talon. Detectives traced his final days through clues left behind at the campsite: his small shelter of branches, his neatly folded shirt, the way his body was positioned inside the tent. He had not died instantly. He had fought, he had hoped. He had stayed close to his mother and aunt because he believed they knew what they were doing. But as the snow thickened, food dwindled, and the cold seeped into their bones, Talon had begun to understand what his mother could not. They were not safe. They were trapped. One investigator, hardened by years of crime scenes, paused for a long moment as he wrote his notes, because in the small details of that campsite he saw the shape of a boy who realized the truth too late. A child who deserved better than the fate handed to him by fear. The truth stung harder than the wind sweeping across the mountains. In the final report, the sheriff read the findings aloud to a silent room. This was a tragedy of misjudgment, a tragedy of fear, a tragedy of isolation. But the room grew colder as the final conclusion was stated clearly and without hesitation. This was preventable. The words hit like a hammer. Preventable if someone had checked sooner, if someone had pushed past Rebecca's walls, if someone had realized silence was a warning sign, not a choice, if someone had gone looking. Rebecca believed the world was ending. In her mind, she was saving her family. In reality, she was leading them into disaster. The irony was cruel. They fled civilization to escape danger, and danger greeted them the moment they left civilization behind. In the end, the bodies were cremated as the family requested. A small memorial was held, where photographs of Rebecca, Christine, and Talon were placed on a table beneath soft white lights. There were no accusations, no arguments, just grief heavy enough to bend the air. Yet the truth lingered in every quiet sob and lowered gaze. The mountain did not kill them. Their fear did. Their silence did. Their belief in a world collapsing did. And in that final, devastating realization, the story found its justice, not through punishment, not through revenge, but through revelation, a truth made visible so no one else follows the same path. A warning carved into the memory of the community, a tragedy that became a mirror for anyone tempted to outrun reality by hiding in the shadows. The truth struck with more force than any weapon ever could. Weeks later, a ranger hiked past the clearing again. The tent was gone, the evidence collected, the ground still scarred by the winter, but something about the silence felt different now, not fearful, not heavy, just still, as if the mountain itself was grieving. He paused, looking at the place where the family had taken their last breaths. Sunlight filtered through the trees, catching on the empty space where their tent had once stood. It felt like the final shot of a story no one would forget, a reminder that fear can be louder than reason, that love can be misled, that silence can destroy, and that the truth, once revealed, becomes the only form of justice left. The ranger lowered his head, then walked away, leaving the clearing to the wind, and the mountain exhaled. The story was finally over.